7. Naturally, Danforth and I studied with special interest and peculiarly personal sense of awe everything pertaining to the immediate district in which we were. Of this local material, there was naturally a vast abundance. And on the tangled ground level of the city, we were lucky enough to find a house of very late date whose walls, though somewhat damaged by a neighboring rift, contained sculptures of decadent workmanship carrying the story of the region much beyond the period of the Pliocene map, whence we derived our last general glimpse of the pre-human world. This was the last place we examined in detail, since what we found there gave a fresh, immediate objective. Certainly we were in one of the strangest, weirdest, and most terrible of all corners of Earth's globes. Of all existing lands, and it was infinitely the most ancient. And the conviction grew upon us that this hideous upland must indeed be the fabled nightmare plateau of Lang, which even the mad author of the Necronomicon was reluctant to discuss. The Green Mountain chain was tremendously long. Starting at a low range at Loophole Land, on the coast of the Weddell Sea, and virtually crossing the entire continent. The really high part stretched in a mighty arc from about latitude 82 degrees east, longitude 60 degrees, to latitude 70 degrees east, longitude 150 degrees. With its concave side toward our camp and its seaward end, in the region of that long ice-locked coast whose hills were glimpsed by Wilkes and Mawson at the Antarctic Circle. Yet even more exaggerations of nature seem disturbingly close at hand. I've said that these peaks are higher than the Himalayas, but the sculptures forbid me to say that they are the Earth's highest. That grim honor is beyond doubt reserved for something which half the sculptures hesitated to record at all, whilst others approached it with obvious repugnance and trepidation. It seems that there was one part of the ancient land, the first part that ever rose from the water after the earth had flung off the moon and the old ones had seeped down from the stars, which had come to be shunned as not vaguely and namelessly evil. Cities built there had crumbled before the time and been found suddenly deserted. Then when the first great earth buckling had convulsed the region in the Comanche age, a frightful line of peaks had shot up suddenly amidst the appalling din and chaos, and earth had perceived her loftiest and most terrible mountains. If the scale of the carvings are correct, these abhorred things must have been much over 40,000 feet high, radically vaster than even the shocking mountains of madness we had crossed. They extended, it appeared, from about latitude 77 degrees east, longitude 70 degrees, to latitude 70 east, longitude 100 degrees, less than 300 miles away from the Dead Sea, so that we would have spied their dreaded summits in the dim western distance had it not been for that vague opalescent haze. Their northern end must likewise be visible from the long Antarctic Circle coastline at Queen Mary Land. Some of the old ones in the decadent days had made strange prayers to those mountains, but none ever went near them or dared to guess what lay beyond. No human eye had ever seen them, and as I'd studied the emotions conveyed in the carvings, I prayed that none ever might. There are protecting hills along the coast beyond them, Queen Mary and Kaiser Wilhelm lands, and I thank heaven no one has ever been able to land or climb those hills. I'm not as skeptical about old tales and fears as I used to be, and I do not laugh now with the pre-human sculpture's notion that lightning paws meaningfully now and then. Each of the brooding crests, and then an unexplained glow shone from one of those terrible pinnacles through the long polar night. There may be a very real and very monstrous meaning in the old narcotic whispers about Kadath and the cold waste. But the terrain close at hand was hardly less strange, even if less namelessly accursed. Soon after the founding of the city, the great mountain range became the seat of the principal temples, and carvings showed what grotesque and fantastic towers had pierced the sky, where now we saw only the glimpse. Only the curious clinging cubes and ramparts. In the course of ages, the caves had appeared and had been shaped into adjuncts of the temples. With the advance of still later epochs, all the limestone veins and regions were hollowed out by ground waters, so that the mountains, the foothills, and the plains below them were a veritable network of connected caverns and galleries. Many graphic sculptures told of the explorations deep underground, and finally of the final discovery of the Stygian sunless sea that lurked at Earth's bowels. This vast nighted gulf had undoubtedly been worn by the great river, which worn down from the nameless and horrible westward mountains. And which had formerly turned at the base of the old one's range and flowed beside that great chain into the Indian Ocean between Bud and Totten lands on Wilkes' coastline. Little by little, it had eaten away at the limestone hill base at its turning, until at last its sapping currents reached the caverns of the ground waters and joined with them in digging a deeper abyss. Finally, its bulk emptied into the hollow hills and left out the old bed toward the ocean dry. Much of the later city, as we now found it, had been built over that former bed. The old ones, understanding what had happened and exercising their always keen artistic sense, had carved into ornate pylons those headlands of the foothills where the great stream began its descent into eternal darkness. This river, once crossed by scores of noble stone bridges, was plainly the one whose extinct course we had seen in our airplane survey. Its position and different carvings in the city helped us to orient ourselves to the scene as it had been at its various stages of the region's age-long, eon-dead history, so that we were able to sketch a hasty but careful map of the salient features. Squares, important buildings, and the like for guidance and further explorations. We could reconstruct in fancy the whole stupendous thing as if it was 1 million or 10 million or 50 million years old ago. For the sculptures told us exactly what the buildings and mountains and squares and suburbs and landscape setting and luxuriant tertiary vegetation had looked like. It must have been a marvelous and mystic beauty. And as I thought of it, I almost forgot about the claiming sense of sinister oppression with which the city's inhuman age and massiveness and deadness and remoteness and glacial twilight had choked and weighed on my spirit. Yet, according to certain carvings, the denizens of that city had themselves known the clutch of oppressive terror, for there was a somber and recurrent type of scene in which the old ones had shown in the act of recoiling affrightedly from some object, never allowed to appear in the design, found in the great river and indicated as having been washed down through the waving, vine-draped cycad forests from those horrible westward mountains. It was only in one late-built house with the decadent carvings that we obtained any foreshadowing of the final calamity leading to the city's desertion. Undoubtedly, there must have been many sculptures of the same age elsewhere, even allowing for the slackened energies and aspirations of a stressful and uncertain period. Indeed, very certain evidence of the existence of others came to us shortly afterward, but this was the only one set we directly encountered. The first and only set we directly encountered. We meant to look farther on, but as I've said, immediate conditions dictated another present objective. There would, though, have been a limit, for after all, hope of a long future occupancy of the place had perished among the old ones. There could not but have been a complete succession of mural decoration. The ultimate blow, of course, was the coming of the great cold, which had once held most of the earth in thrall, and which had never departed from the ill-fated poles. The great cold that at the world's other extremity put an end to the fabled lands of Lomar and Hyperborea. Just as when this tendency in the Antarctic began, it would be hard to say in terms of exact years. Nowadays, we set the beginning at the general glacial periods at a distance of about 500,000 years from the present. But at the poles, the terrible scourge must have commenced much earlier. All quantitative estimates are partly guesswork, but it's quite likely that the decadent sculptures were made considerably less than 1 million years ago, that the actual desertion of the city was complete long before the conventional opening of the Pliocene. 500,000 years ago, as reckoned in terms of the Earth's whole surface. In the decadent sculptures, there were signs of thinner vegetation everywhere and of a decreased country life on the part of the old ones. Heating devices were shown in the houses, and winter travelers were represented as muffled in protective fabrics. Then we saw a whole series of cartouches. The continuous band arrangement being frequently interrupted in these elite carvings, depicting a constantly growing migration to the nearest refuges of a greater warmth. Some fleeing to cities under the sea off to the far away coast, and some clambering down through networks of limestone and caverns in the hollow hills to the neighboring black abyss of subterranean waters. In the end, it seems to have been a neighboring abyss which received the greatest colonization. This was probably due, no doubt, to the traditional sacredness of their special region, but may have been more conclusively determined by the opportunities it gave for continuing the use of the great temples on the Honeycomb Mountains, and for retaining the vast land sea as a place of summer residence and base of communication with various minds. The linkage of old and new abodes was made more effectively by means of several gratings and improvements along the connecting routes, including the chiseling of numerous direct tunnels from the ancient metropolis to the Black Abyss. Sharply down-pointing tunnels whose mouths were carefully drilled according to our most thoughtful estimates. On the map guide we were compiling, it was obvious that at least 2 of these tunnels lay within a reasonable exploring distance of where we were, both being on the mountain edge of the city and one less a quarter mile toward the ancient river course, and the other perhaps twice that distance from the opposite direction.